Dr. Alan Faulkner was a respected figure in his small town of Ridgeway, known for his generosity and dedication to his patients. He was the town's beloved family physician, treating everyone from children to the elderly with an unwavering commitment. But beneath his benevolent exterior, he harbored a dark secret that would lead to his untimely demise. It all began when a new family moved into town, Charles Henderson and his daughter, Emily. Charles was a retired military officer, suffering from a severe heart condition that required regular checkups. Emily, a strikingly beautiful woman in her mid-20s, had put her life on hold to care for her ailing father. With her long auburn hair, piercing green eyes, and a calm demeanor, Emily quickly caught the attention of everyone in town, including Dr. Faulkner. Dr. Faulkner, in his mid-40s and married with 2 children, had always been a professional in his dealings. But something about Emily drew him in, and their initial professional encounters soon turned into something more. It started innocently enough, a smile here, a compliment there. Soon, their meetings became more frequent and their conversations more intimate. Emily seemed lonely and burdened by the responsibility of caring for her father. Dr. Faulkner, with his compassionate nature, provided her a shoulder to lean on. What began as a few comforting words soon escalated into stolen glances, secretive text messages, and late-night phone calls. They both knew it was wrong, but their connection was undeniable, and they were spiraling into a whirlwind of passion and desire. As the affair grew more intense, they took greater risks. They would meet in the secluded wooded area behind Dr. Faulkner under the guise of discussing her father's treatment. Those secret meetings, filled with whispered confessions and forbidden kisses, soon turned into heated encounters. Dr. Faulkner, intoxicated by Emily's youth and beauty, was willing to risk everything, his career, his family, and his reputation, for this forbidden love. But in a small town like Ridgeway, secrets don't stay hidden for long. Rumors began to spread. Patients noticed the lingering looks between Dr. Faulkner and Emily. The nurses exchanged knowing glances when Emily would stay after hours to discuss her father's condition. Whispers of an affair began circulating, but Dr. Faulkner brushed them off as idle gossip. One evening, after an intense argument with his wife about his increasingly erratic behavior, Dr. Faulkner left home under the pretext of checking on a patient. Instead, he met Emily in a secluded cabin on the outskirts of town, a place they had rented under a false name. There, away from prying eyes, they indulged in their forbidden passion, unaware that their every move was being watched. The observer was none other than Charles Henderson. He had grown suspicious of the time Emily was spending with the doctor and had followed her that night. The sight of his daughter in the arms of a man twice her age was too much for him to bear. Consumed with rage and betrayal, he confronted Emily the next day. She tearfully admitted the affair but begged for his forgiveness, insisting that she loved Dr. Faulkner and that they planned to be together once his father was stable enough. Charles, furious and heartbroken, forbade Emily from seeing Dr. Faulkner again. He threatened to expose their affair and ruin the doctor's life if they didn't end it immediately. Emily, torn between her love for Dr. Faulkner and loyalty to her father, reluctantly agreed to end things. But the affair had already set in motion a series of events that would lead to a tragic end. Dr. Faulkner was unwilling to let go of the only happiness he had felt in years. He began to make plans that would lead to devastating consequences for everyone involved. As Emily tried to distance herself, Dr. Faulkner became desperate. He began showing up unannounced at her home, pleading with her to reconsider. His obsession with Emily grew, and he started behaving erratically, which didn't go unnoticed by his family or the townspeople. The once respected doctor was now seen as a man on the brink, and it wouldn't be long before everything came crashing down. Dr. Faulkner's obsession with Emily grew as the days passed. He couldn't fathom the idea of losing her and became consumed by thoughts of how to win her back. His behavior became increasingly erratic. He started drinking heavily and showing up uninvited at Emily's home, begging her to leave her father and run away with him. Emily, torn between her love for Dr. Faulkner and her father's ultimatum, found herself trapped in an unbearable situation. Charles Henderson, still furious and distrustful, had begun to keep a close eye on his daughter, limiting her movements and cutting off her contact with Dr. Faulkner. He even went as far as threatening to file a complaint against the doctor, which would ruin his career and reputation. Dr. Faulkner, desperate and pushed to the brink, felt his world closing in around him. One fateful evening, Dr. Faulkner hatched a desperate plan. If he couldn't have Emily, he would make sure no one else could either. His thoughts turned dark, and he began to consider a sinister solution to his problem. He would eliminate the one obstacle standing between him and Emily, Charles Henderson. On the night of October 17th, under the guise of a house call. Dr. Faulkner visited the Henderson home. Charles, suspecting nothing, allowed him in, thinking he'd come to check on his condition. Dr. Faulkner carried a small medical bag, its contents masking his true intentions. As he chatted casually with Charles, his eyes darted around looking for Emily, but she was nowhere to be seen. Emily, exhausted from the emotional turmoil of the past weeks, was asleep upstairs, unaware of the storm brewing below. Dr. Faulkner took a deep breath and reached into his bag, his heart pounding in his chest. He pulled out a syringe filled with a lethal dose of potassium chloride, a substance that, when injected, could induce a heart attack and leave little traceable evidence. He hesitated for a moment, the weight of what he was about to do pressing down on him. But his obsession with Emily overshadowed any sense of morality. He knew this was the only way he could be with her. With a forced smile, he asked Charles to sit down and told him he needed to administer a routine injection to manage his pain. Charles, trusting the doctor, complied. Dr. Faulkner's hands shook slightly as he approached Charles. With one swift motion, he injected the deadly dose into the unsuspecting man's arm. Charles flinched, confused, his eyes widening in fear as he felt a cold sensation spreading through his veins. He tried to speak, to question what was happening, but his body betrayed him. Within moments, he collapsed, clutching his chest, gasping for breath. Dr. Faulkner watched in morbid fascination as Charles's life slipped away. He knew there was no turning back now. He checked for a pulse. Nothing. It was done. He stood there for a moment, his mind racing, trying to process what he had just done. The house was eerily silent, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. He needed to act quickly. He composed himself and went upstairs to Emily's room. She woke up startled, confused to see him there. Before she could react, he spun a story about how her father had collapsed and was in need of urgent medical attention. Emily rushed downstairs to find her father lying motionless on the living room floor. Dr. Faulkner called 911, pretending to be in a state of shock, and reported that Charles had suffered a massive heart attack. When the paramedics arrived, they found Emily sobbing uncontrollably, clutching her father's lifeless hand. Dr. Faulkner stood off to the side, feigning grief, his mind racing with the realization that he had actually done it. The paramedics declared Charles dead at the scene, attributing his death to his pre-existing heart condition. No one suspected foul play, and Dr. Faulkner was free to comfort Emily in her time of grief. But things didn't go as he had planned. Instead of bringing them closer together, Charles' death drove a wedge between them. Emily, devastated by her father's sudden death, was inconsolable. She withdrew from Dr. blaming herself for what happened. She couldn't bear to look at him, let alone be with him. Dr. Faulkner's plans were unraveling, and he was slowly losing control of the situation. Desperate and deranged, Dr. Faulkner began to stalk Emily, watching her every move, convinced that she would eventually come back to him. But Emily, grieving and consumed with guilt, began to suspect something wasn't right about her father's death. Little did she know, the truth was far darker than she could have imagined. Emily's suspicions about her father's sudden death grew with each passing day. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Dr. Faulkner's presence, once a source of comfort, now felt suffocating and unnerving. He was always around, insisting on helping her through her grief. But Emily felt an inexplicable sense of dread whenever he was near. She began to pull away, no longer answering his calls or messages. Frustrated and desperate, Dr. Faulkner made one last attempt to reconnect with Emily. He arrived at her house unannounced one evening, hoping to convince her that they could still be together. But Emily, tired and emotionally drained, refused to let him in. As he stood outside her door, pleading for another chance, she noticed the way his eyes darted nervously around and the sweat forming on his brow. A chilling thought crossed her mind. What if Dr. Faulkner had something to do with her father's death? Unable to ignore her suspicions any longer, Emily decided to take matters into her own hands. She reached out to her father's old military friend, Detective Samuel Hayes, a retired officer who still had connections in the local police department. She confided in him about her doubts and asked if he could help investigate further. Detective Hayes, intrigued and concerned, agreed to look into the case. He started by requesting a copy of the autopsy report and noticed something unusual. The report mentioned that no toxicology tests had been conducted due to the assumption that Charles's death was natural. Hayes, however, insisted on a thorough re-examination, this time including a toxicology screening. The results were shocking. A lethal dose of potassium chloride was found in Charles's system, confirming Emily's worst fears. Her father had been murdered. The discovery sent shockwaves through the small town of Ridgeway, and suspicion quickly fell on Dr. Faulkner, the only person present at the time of Charles's death. Meanwhile, Dr. Faulkner, oblivious to the ongoing investigation, was spiraling out of control. He had lost Emily, and with her, his sense of reality. His behavior became increasingly erratic as paranoia took hold. He started noticing police cars parked near his clinic and felt the eyes of the townspeople on him wherever he went. The once respected doctor was now a pariah, and it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. Detective Hayes, armed with the toxicology report, obtained a warrant to search Dr. Faulkner's home and clinic. What they found was damning. A stash of medical supplies, including several vials of potassium chloride, hidden in a locked cabinet in his office. There were also printed emails and letters professing his love for Emily, evidence of his obsession. As the police pieced together the timeline, it became clear that Dr. Faulkner had planned the murder meticulously. He had used his medical knowledge to select a drug that would mimic a natural heart attack, hoping to cover his tracks and make the death appear accidental. But he had underestimated Emily's determination to uncover the truth. Dr. Faulkner was arrested at his clinic, his face a mask of disbelief as they read him his rights. News of his arrest spread quickly, and the town that once revered him now watched in horror as the story of his affair and subsequent murder plot unraveled. Emily, heartbroken but relieved, finally felt a sense of closure, knowing that justice for her father was within reach. During his interrogation, Dr. Faulkner initially denied everything, insisting that he had only ever wanted to help Emily and her father. But under the relentless pressure of questioning, the cracks in his story began to show. Faced with the overwhelming evidence against him, he broke down and confessed to the murder, his voice hollow and defeated. He had killed Charles in a moment of desperation, convinced that removing him from the equation would allow him and Emily to be together. The confession shocked everyone, but for Emily, it was the final, undeniable truth. The man she had once trusted had betrayed her in the worst possible way. Dr. Faulkner was charged with first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case that had rocked Ridgeway finally came to a close, but the scars it left on the town and on Emily would take much longer to heal. As she stood outside the courthouse, watching the man who had destroyed her family being led away in handcuffs, Emily felt a mixture of relief and sorrow. She had lost her father and been betrayed by someone she thought she could trust, but she had also found the strength to seek justice and expose the truth. The story of Dr. Faulkner's descent from a respected physician to a desperate murderer would be remembered in Ridgeway for years to come, a chilling reminder of how obsession and desire could lead even the most upstanding person down a dark and deadly path.